Case 1. Pearl Fernandez. The boy nobody saved. To understand what happened to Gabriel Fernandez, you first have to understand what his life looked like from the outside versus what it looked like on the inside. From the outside, Gabriel was an 8-year-old boy living in a home in Palmdale, California, in the Antelope Valley, a sprawling, sun-baked stretch of Los Angeles County where working-class neighborhoods press up against the high desert and where families like Gabriel's were not unusual. A mother, a boyfriend, children navigating the ordinary chaos of everyday life. That was the outside. The inside was something so far removed from ordinary that the detectives who later processed the crime scene described a level of sustained, deliberate cruelty that they said they had never encountered in all their years of law enforcement. Gabriel Daniel Fernandez was born in 2004. By the time he was 8 years old, he had been placed back in the care of his mother, Pearl Fernandez, after previously living with other family members. Pearl was in a relationship with a man named Ursula, and from virtually the moment Gabriel came to live with them in the apartment on East Avenue Q in Palmdale, the abuse began. What followed over the next several months was a campaign of torture so systematic, so sustained, and so sadistic that it is almost impossible to reconcile with the concept of a human being doing it to a child. Gabriel was beaten regularly, with fists, with a bat, with belts. He was burned with cigarettes. He was made to eat his own vomit. He was forced to sleep in a cabinet. He was starved. He was denied basic hygiene. He was made to wear girls' clothing to school, and when he told teachers and school counselors that he was being hurt at home, the system that existed specifically to protect children like him moved too slowly, communicated too poorly, and ultimately failed him at every critical turn. Teachers reported their concerns. Social workers visited the home. Referrals were made and closed. The machinery of Child Protective Services ground forward and produced nothing that saved him. On May 22, 2013, emergency services received a call from Pearl Fernandez reporting that her son was not breathing. When paramedics arrived at the apartment, they found Gabriel in a condition that first responders later described in court testimony with barely concealed anguish. He had a cracked skull, 3 broken ribs, missing teeth, cigarette burns across his body, BB pellets embedded in his lungs and groin. His injuries were not the product of a single violent episode. They were the accumulated evidence of months of deliberate, repeated, escalating torture. Gabriel Fernandez was transported to the hospital, where he clung to life for 2 days. On May 24, 2013, he died. He was 8 years old. The investigation that followed was swift and damning. Pearl Fernandez and Ursula were arrested. The case immediately drew national attention, not only because of the severity of the abuse, but because of the mountain of evidence showing that multiple agencies had known something was wrong in that apartment and had failed to act decisively. Teachers, social workers, first responders. The trail of missed opportunities was long, and California's child welfare system found itself under a microscope unlike anything it had faced before. Pearl Fernandez did not go to trial. In February 2018, nearly 5 years after her son's death, she appeared in court and entered a guilty plea to first-degree murder involving torture. She stood before the court, the mother of the child she had allowed to be tortured for months, the woman who had made the phone calls, who had lived in that apartment, who had watched it all happen and participated in it, and she pleaded guilty. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She will die in prison. Ursula, the boyfriend, went to trial and was convicted of first-degree murder with the special circumstance of torture. He was sentenced to death. In the aftermath of Gabriel's death, California launched sweeping investigations into the Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services. Social workers who had handled Gabriel's case were charged with felony child abuse and falsifying public records, a landmark development that sent shockwaves through the child welfare system nationwide. The case directly inspired the creation of Gabriel's Law, legislation aimed at strengthening the oversight and accountability of child protective services in California. A Netflix documentary series later explored the case in detail, bringing Gabriel's story to millions of viewers around the world and reigniting national conversation about the systemic failures that allowed a child to suffer for months in plain sight. Gabriel Fernandez deserved to grow up. He deserved to go to school, to make friends, to discover what he was good at, to become whoever he was going to become. He deserved a mother who protected him. Instead, he spent the final months of his life in a cabinet, enduring pain that no child should ever know, in a home that became his prison and ultimately his grave. Pearl Fernandez will never see freedom again, and Gabriel will never be forgotten. If this case moves you the way it moves us, please take a moment to hit that like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to Cold Case Revisited. Every subscription helps us keep telling these stories for the children who can no longer tell them themselves. Case 2. Heather Barron. What they did to Anthony. There is a particular cruelty in the way Anthony Avalos died. Not only in the physical violence, though that was extraordinary in its brutality, but in the reason his abusers gave for it, and in the complete absence of mercy that defined the final weeks and days of his 10-year-old life. Anthony Avalos was killed, according to prosecutors and the evidence presented at trial, in part because he was perceived as gay. He had told family members that he liked boys. And in the home where he lived with his mother Heather Barron and her boyfriend Kareem Leva in Lancaster, California, that admission became a justification for escalating levels of violence that ended with his death in June 2018. Anthony was born in 2007. He was one of several children living in the Lancaster home, a household that, like so many of the homes in these cases, presented a surface appearance that concealed the reality within. Heather Barron was his mother. Kareem Leva was her boyfriend. Together, they subjected Anthony to months of abuse that investigators and prosecutors described as torture. He was beaten. He was dropped on his head repeatedly from heights. He was denied food. He was forced to kneel on rice for extended periods as punishment. He was isolated, humiliated, and broken down in ways that went far beyond physical injury into something that attacked his very sense of self. The abuse intensified, according to prosecutors, after Anthony disclosed that he liked boys. What followed was a period of escalating violence that culminated in the final days of his life, when Anthony was subjected to such severe injuries that by the time emergency services were called on June 21, 2018, he was already beyond saving. He arrived at the hospital unresponsive. He never regained consciousness. Anthony Avalos died on June 22, 2018. He was 10 years old. The autopsy revealed the full scope of what had been done to him. There was severe head trauma. There was evidence of long-term physical abuse written across his body in a language of bruises, scars, and injuries that told the story of months of sustained violence. Investigators who processed the case described it as one of the worst child abuse deaths they had ever seen, and these were investigators in Los Angeles County, a jurisdiction that had unfortunately handled more than its share of devastating cases. Like Gabriel Fernandez before him, Anthony Avalos had appeared on the radar of Child Protective Services. There had been reports. There had been visits. The system had touched his case and then let it slip through its fingers. The parallel between Anthony's case and Gabriel's was not lost on prosecutors, advocates, or the public. Two children, both in the Antelope Valley, both killed by a mother and her boyfriend, both failed by the same institutional machinery that existed to protect them. The outrage that followed Anthony's death was fierce and justified. Heather Barron and Kareem Leva were both charged with first-degree murder with the special circumstance of torture. The trials were lengthy and emotionally devastating for everyone involved. Prosecutors presented evidence of the sustained nature of the abuse, the deliberate cruelty that characterized it, and the particular intensification that followed Anthony's disclosure about his sexuality. In 2023, Heather Barron was convicted of first-degree murder with torture. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kareem Leva was also convicted and sentenced to death. Anthony Avalos was a child who, by all accounts from those who knew him outside that home, was bright, affectionate, and full of life. He liked to dance. He was funny. He was the kind of kid who could light up a room. He told his mother something personal and true about himself, and she allowed that truth to become a weapon used against him. He deserved acceptance. He deserved love. He deserved to grow up in a world where who he was would be celebrated, not punished. Heather Barron will never see freedom again, and Anthony's story will not be silenced. If you believe every child deserves justice, show it. Like this video, drop a comment for Anthony, and subscribe to Cold Case Revisited so you never miss a story. Case 3. Susan Eubanks. One night, for sons. Some crimes are defined by their duration, the slow accumulation of violence over weeks and months. Others arrive in a single devastating night that compresses unimaginable loss into hours. The crime committed by Susan Eubanks on October 26, 1997 belongs to the second category. In a single night, in a home in San Marcos, California, in San Diego County, Eubanks shot and killed all 4 of her sons. The boys were 14, 7, 6, and 4 years old. By the time the sun rose the next morning, she had destroyed an entire generation of her own family. Susan Eubanks was 31 years old at the time of the killings. The 4 boys, Brandon, Matthew, Nicholas, and Benjamin, had different fathers, and the household existed amid the complicated dynamics that often characterized her relationships with the men who had fathered her children. On the night of October 26th, Eubanks had been drinking. She had also, according to testimony and evidence presented at trial, been in conflict with the father of some of her children over the phone earlier that evening. Whatever the specific cascade of events that led to what happened next, at some point in the late hours of that October night, Susan Eubanks retrieved a firearm and went to where her sons were sleeping or resting in the home. She shot 14-year-old Brandon first. Then she moved through the house and shot the younger boys, Matthew, Nicholas, and Benjamin. For children, for lives ended in the same home where they slept, by the same hands that were supposed to keep them safe. After the shootings, Eubanks attempted to take her own life, but survived. When law enforcement arrived, they found the 4 boys dead and Eubanks alive. The investigation was straightforward in the sense that there was no mystery about who had committed the crime. The trial, however, was an exercise in confronting the full weight of what had happened. For counts of first-degree murder, for children, for separate lives snuffed out on the same night. Prosecutors presented the evidence methodically and devastatingly. The defense attempted to frame the killings in the context of Eubanks's emotional state, her drinking, and the relationship dynamics that had preceded the night in question. The jury was unmoved. Susan Eubanks was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder. She was initially sentenced to death. That sentence was later modified, and she was ultimately resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She remains incarcerated and will die behind bars. The case left lasting trauma on the San Marcos community and on the extended families of the 4 boys, who have spent decades processing a loss that defies adequate description. Brandon was old enough to have understood, at least in some measure, what was happening in his family. The 3 younger boys, 7, 6, and 4, were at ages when the world still makes a kind of magical sense, when fear can be chased away by a parent's presence, when home is synonymous with safety. They were betrayed in the most fundamental way a parent can betray a child. For boys, one night, a mother who chose destruction over every other option available to her. Susan Eubanks will never see freedom again. Please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Revisited. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to the work of keeping these stories alive. Case 4, Sandi Nieves. The night she lit the match. Fire has a particular place in the history of human violence. It is elemental. It is irreversible. And when it is used as a weapon against the most vulnerable, it represents a form of cruelty that occupies its own terrible category. On July 1, 1998, in Santa Clarita, California, a woman named Sandi Nieves poured gasoline inside her home and lit it on fire. Her 4 daughters were inside. None of them survived. Sandi Nieves was in her early 30s at the time of the killings. Her 4 daughters ranged in age from young children to early adolescence. The circumstances surrounding the family in the period leading up to the fire involved a contentious and deteriorating relationship situation, and Nieves had reportedly expressed intentions that, in retrospect, served as warnings that either went unrecognized or unheeded. On the night of July 1st, she acted on those intentions. She poured gasoline inside the home. She set it alight, and she left. The 4 girls died from smoke inhalation. They did not die in the initial blast or from flames directly. They died as the smoke filled the home and took from them the very air they needed to breathe. This detail is important because it means there was time. There was a period in which, had circumstances been different, the fire been discovered sooner, the smoke detectors worked differently, something intervened, those girls might have been reached. They were not. When fire investigators and law enforcement processed the scene and the evidence, the conclusion was unambiguous. This was not an accident. This was not a tragic malfunction. The presence of accelerant, the pattern of the fire's origin, the circumstances surrounding Nieves' departure from the home before the fire was reported, all of it pointed to deliberate, premeditated arson. Sandi Nieves had intentionally set her home on fire with her daughters inside it. She was arrested and charged. The trial produced evidence of planning and intent that prosecutors used to establish not merely that Nieves had started the fire, but that she had done so with the knowledge and the purpose of ending her daughters' lives. The jury found her guilty on multiple counts of first-degree murder and arson. She was sentenced to death, a sentence that reflected the jury's assessment of the deliberate, premeditated, and catastrophic nature of what she had done. The case became one of the defining child homicide cases in Los Angeles County in the late 1990s, a period already marked by several high-profile cases involving violence against children. Santa Clarita, a community in the northern reaches of Los Angeles County that generally thinks of itself as insulated from the worst of urban violence, was shaken by the revelation that one of its own residents had done something so incomprehensible within what appeared to be an ordinary suburban home. For daughters, a can of gasoline, a lit match, and a mother who walked away. Sandi Nieves will never see freedom again. If these stories matter to you, hit that subscribe button and join the Cold Case Revisited community. Together, we make sure these children are never forgotten. Case 5. Marilyn K. The hotel room. Sometimes the most devastating crimes occur in the most mundane settings. Places so ordinary, so thoroughly unremarkable, that their very ordinariness makes the events that take place within them all the more jarring. A hotel room. A nondescript room somewhere along a California highway, with its generic bedding and its hum of the air conditioning unit and its complete anonymity. This is where Marilyn K. took her 2 children in November 2013. And this is where she killed them. Marilyn K. had been engaged in a prolonged and bitterly contested custody dispute with the father of her children. She had a 13-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter. Whatever the specific dynamics of that custody dispute, whatever grievances, fears, resentments, or calculations existed in Marilyn Edge's mind during that period, at some point she made a decision that custody of her children by their father was something she was unwilling to accept. And she translated that decision into action in the most irreversible way possible. In November 2013, she took her son and her daughter to a California hotel room. Once there, she poisoned them. She then smothered them. She killed both of her children, a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old, in a deliberate, methodical manner that prosecutors would later characterize as premeditated murder. After killing her children, Edge attempted to take her own life. She survived. When authorities arrived at the hotel room and discovered what had happened, the investigation pointed clearly and quickly to Edge as the person responsible. There was no ambiguity about the cause of the children's deaths. There was no alternative explanation to be constructed or explored. The evidence told a straightforward and horrifying story. A mother had brought her children to a hotel room and killed them. Marilyn K. Edge was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. She pleaded guilty. In pleading guilty, she spared the children's father and the broader family the additional trauma of a lengthy trial in which the details of what had been done to the children would be presented in a courtroom. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She will die in prison. The case sits within a larger and deeply troubling category of child homicide known to researchers and law enforcement as filicide in the context of custody disputes. Cases where a parent kills their children as a final, devastating act in a conflict with the other parent. These cases represent a category of violence that is both preventable and profoundly resistant to prevention, because the warning signs are often present, but the willingness to intervene decisively before tragedy strikes is frequently insufficient. Marilyn Edge's children were known to exist within a contentious custody situation. They paid for that situation with their lives. A 13-year-old boy, a 10-year-old girl, a hotel room, a mother who decided that if she could not have them, nobody would. Marilyn K. Edge will never see freedom again. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Revisited. Your support keeps this channel going and keeps these stories in the light where they belong. Case 6. Kelle and Brassart. While she was scrolling, not all the cases in this documentary involve premeditated cruelty in the form of prolonged abuse or deliberate violence. Some of the most devastating losses of children come from a different kind of failure, not the active choice to harm, but the catastrophic, unforgivable choice not to protect. The case of Kelle and Brassart and her 2-year-old daughter in September 2022 represents this category, and it is no less devastating for the absence of deliberate malice. In some ways, it is more so. Because the thing that killed this little girl was not a weapon. It was a phone, and a pool, and a mother who was somewhere else in her mind while her daughter drowned. Kelle and Brassart was at her home in California in September 2022 when her 2-year-old daughter gained access to the family's backyard pool. The child could not swim. She was 2 years old. The pool was unsecured in the manner required to prevent exactly this kind of tragedy. And Brassart, at the time her daughter was drowning, was intoxicated and engaged with dating applications on her phone. She was not watching her daughter. She was not present, not physically absent from the home, but absent in every way that mattered. By the time the child was found in the pool, it was too late. Prosecutors in the case argued that the circumstances amounted to something beyond a tragic accident. The combination of intoxication, the use of dating applications to the exclusion of supervising a 2-year-old child, and the failure to ensure the pool was secured all added up, in the prosecution's framing, to a level of negligence that crossed the legal threshold into criminal conduct. This is not a comfortable argument for many people to process, because the instinct to draw a sharp line between accident and crime is strong. But the law recognizes gradations, and in California, the behavior that led to this child's drowning was judged to meet the standard for criminal culpability. Kelle and Brassart was convicted of second-degree murder and felony child neglect. The conviction sent a clear and deliberate message that the failure to supervise a child, when that failure rises to the level of gross negligence and is compounded by intoxication and active distraction, can and will be treated as a crime. The sentence she received reflected the severity of that judgment. A 2-year-old girl drowned in her own backyard pool while her mother scrolled through dating apps. The child's name deserves to be spoken. She deserved a mother who was present, fully, completely, soberly present, in every moment, but most especially in the moments when her life depended on it. The case has become a reference point in discussions about parental supervision, pool safety, and the legal standards that govern parental responsibility in California. It has also become a reference point in something more difficult to quantify. A conversation about what it means to be truly present for a child in an era of smartphones and social media and the infinite distractions of a connected world. Kelle and Brassart was convicted and sentenced, and her daughter never got to turn 3. If this story moves you, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Revisited. Every bell you hit means we can keep bringing you these stories. Case 7, Pamela Ferreyra. Baby Garin, the child without a name. Some cases haunt the true crime world not because of the scale of the violence or the duration of the abuse, but because of the particular way in which a human life was reduced to an object, discarded, abandoned, erased. The case of the infant known for years as Baby Garin is one of those cases. It is a story that spans decades, stretches from a cold December night in 1994 to the era of advanced DNA forensic technology, and ends with the belated identification of a woman who thought she had buried her crime along with the child she abandoned. In December 1994, in Monterey County, California, a newborn baby was found dead. The infant had been abandoned. There was no mother present, no identification, no context to explain the presence of this tiny body in the circumstances in which it was found. Investigators at the time did everything they could with the tools available to them. They processed the scene, they conducted their inquiries, they tried to identify the child and the mother. They could not. The baby was given a name, Baby Garin, by the community and investigators who could not bear to let the child exist in records only as an unnamed victim. The case went cold. The years passed. The world moved on. Baby Garin remained unidentified. Then came the era of genetic genealogy, the remarkable intersection of consumer DNA testing, genealogical databases, and investigative technique that has in recent years cracked open dozens of cold cases that once seemed permanently sealed. Investigators in Monterey County, using DNA evidence that had been preserved from the original scene, worked to run the genetic profile through available databases. The process of genetic genealogy involves building family trees from DNA matches and working backward and forward through those trees to identify likely candidates. It is painstaking, time-consuming, and, when it works, extraordinary. It worked. Investigators were able to identify Pamela Ferreyra as the mother of baby Garin. By the time her identity was confirmed, decades had passed since December 1994. Ferreyra had lived her life, had presumably moved forward from whatever circumstances had led to the abandonment of her newborn child that December night in Monterey County, while baby Garin remained in records and in the memory of the community that had given the child a name and refused to forget. When confronted with the evidence, Pamela Ferreyra pleaded guilty. She pleaded guilty to manslaughter and child abuse. The plea and the sentence she received were shaped by the passage of time, the nature of the charges, and the legal framework that applies to cases of this kind. She was sentenced to prison. The case is a remarkable demonstration of the long reach of forensic technology and the principle that time does not erase culpability. It is also a meditation on the circumstances that lead women to make the catastrophic decision to abandon a newborn, circumstances that are often rooted in fear, desperation, poverty, and isolation. None of those circumstances excuse what happened to baby Garin, but they are part of the full picture that a documentary like this owes its audience. Baby Garin was a person, a newborn child who arrived in the world and was given no chance to stay in it. He or she deserved a name and a family and a life. Instead, a community gave this child a name decades too late, and the law caught up with the woman responsible in a way that she had never expected. Pamela Ferreyra will answer for what she did, and baby Garin will be remembered. Please take a second to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Revisited. It's the easiest way to make sure stories like baby Garin's are never buried again. Case 8. Susan Polk, the therapist's wife. The case of Susan Polk does not fit the template of the other cases in this documentary in a simple or straightforward way. She did not kill a child. She was not convicted of harming her children directly. But she is here, in this list, in this conversation, in this documentary, because what happened in the Polk household in Orinda, California, over the course of decades, and what happened on a night in October 2002, and what happened to her children in the aftermath of that night, represents a different kind of maternal darkness. A darkness rooted in manipulation, in the weaponization of mother-child relationships, and in the profound and lasting damage that can be inflicted on children who are used as instruments in an adult conflict. Susan Polk's story begins long before the night of the killing. As a teenager, she became a patient of a therapist named Felix Polk. What developed between the teenage patient and her therapist was a relationship that crossed every ethical and legal boundary that exists to protect vulnerable young people in therapeutic settings. Felix Polk, significantly older than Susan, entered into a romantic relationship with her that eventually became a marriage. The ethical violations at the foundation of that relationship, a therapist exploiting his position of trust and power over a minor patient, are a crucial part of the context for everything that followed. By 2002, the marriage between Susan and Felix Polk had deteriorated into a state of bitter, acrimonious conflict. There were allegations, counter-allegations, contentious divorce proceedings, and, at the center of it all, 3 sons who were being pulled in every direction by the disintegrating relationship between their parents. Susan Polk had, by this point, developed beliefs and narratives about her life and her marriage that those around her found increasingly disconnected from verifiable reality. She claimed Felix had made threats against her. She constructed a framework for her situation that positioned her as a victim in danger. On the night of October 13, 2002, Felix Polk was killed in the pool house of the family's property in Orinda. He had been stabbed multiple times. Susan Polk claimed self-defense, claimed that Felix had attacked her, and that she had killed him in the course of defending her own life. One of their sons discovered his father's body. The investigation, the arrest, and the subsequent trial of Susan Polk became one of the most extensively covered legal proceedings in Northern California in the 2000s and 2000s. Part of what made it so compelling to the public and the media was Susan Polk's decision to represent herself at trial, a decision that put her directly in the courtroom not merely as a defendant, but as an active participant in the examination of witnesses, the presentation of evidence, and the construction of arguments. She was, by turns, articulate and erratic, composed and volatile. The trial lasted months. She was convicted of second-degree murder in 2006. She was sentenced to 16 years to life in prison. The children, her sons, were collateral damage of an extraordinary kind. One had discovered his father's body. Another had come to believe his mother's narrative so thoroughly that he defended her publicly and vociferously during the trial. The Polk sons were shaped by and scarred by everything that happened in that household, by the years of conflict that preceded the killing, by the night of the killing itself, and by the long, public, painful trial that followed. Susan Polk was eventually paroled after serving her sentence. However, she belongs in this documentary because her case represents a form of maternal harm that rarely makes the same headlines as physical abuse, but is no less real in its consequences. The harm of using children as weapons, of distorting their reality, of placing them at the center of adult violence, and then expecting them to emerge whole. The Polk case is a story about the long shadows that damaged adults cast over the children in their care, and the cost that children pay for the pathologies and failures of the people who are supposed to protect them. Like this video if you believe every form of harm to children deserves to be named, and subscribe to Cold Case Revisited for more stories that the world needs to hear. Case 9. Ursula Juarez. Nobody came for Noah. The name Noah Quattro carries with it, for anyone who followed the case in real time, an almost unbearable weight. He was 4 years old. He died in July 2019 in Palmdale, California, the same stretch of Los Angeles County desert that had already claimed Gabriel Fernandez 6 years earlier. And like Gabriel's case, Noah's death became a devastating referendum on the failures of a child protective system that had been warned, repeatedly and specifically, that he was in danger. Noah Quattro was the son of Jose Quattro Jr. and Ursula Juarez. He had been placed with his parents by the Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services after previous removals from the home had occurred, previous removals that acknowledged there was danger in that home, and a subsequent return to that same home that, in retrospect, constitutes one of the most catastrophic decisions in the agency's history. Noah had been removed from his parents' care on at least 2 prior occasions. He had been placed with them again. He died. The abuse that Noah suffered before his death was, like Gabriel Fernandez's case, systematic and prolonged. He was beaten. He was denied adequate food. He was subjected to physical cruelty of the kind that leaves marks not just on a child's body, but on the soul of every person who later has to process the evidence of it. When he was found unresponsive in July 2019 and emergency services were called, he was already beyond saving. He was 4 years old. He had never had a chance. The investigation revealed not only the extent of the abuse inflicted on Noah, but also the full scope of the systemic failure that had preceded his death. Social workers had visited the home. Reports had been made. The machinery had turned and produced nothing protective. Los Angeles County found itself in the same position it had been in after Gabriel Fernandez, facing questions about why a child had died when the system had known he was at risk, and struggling to provide answers that could satisfy a community and a nation demanding accountability. The political and institutional fallout was significant. The head of the Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services resigned in the aftermath of Noah's death. Investigations were launched. Reforms were proposed and debated. The parallel with Gabriel Fernandez was inescapable and was drawn explicitly and repeatedly by advocates, legislators, and journalists covering the case. Ursula Juarez was charged in connection with Noah's death. She pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 22 years to life in prison. Jose Quattro Jr. was also charged and faced his own legal proceedings. 22 years to life. For a 4-year-old boy who had been handed back to the people who were hurting him by the system that was supposed to protect him. For a child who had been removed from danger twice and placed back into it once too many times. For Noah Quattro, who died in Palmdale in the summer of 2019 and whose case became the second galvanizing child abuse death in that community in less than a decade. Noah Quattro deserved to turn 5. He deserved to start kindergarten. He deserved a childhood. He deserved to know what it felt like to be safe. Ursula Juarez will spend decades behind bars. And Noah will always be 4 years old in the memory of everyone who fought to see justice done for him. Please like this video for Noah, subscribe to Cold Case Revisited, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Case 10, Kayong. 3 boys, 1 bathtub. There are cases in the true crime canon that resist easy categorization. Cases that sit at the intersection of mental health, crisis, and violence in ways that complicate the simple narrative of evil without excusing the outcome. The case of Kayong is, in some respects, one of those cases. But at its core, whatever the surrounding circumstances, whatever the internal state of the woman involved, 3 small boys, a 7-year-old, a 2-year-old, and an 11-month-old infant, died in Sacramento, California, in March 2011. And their mother killed them. Kayong was a mother of several children living in Sacramento. In March 2011, she was in the midst of what prosecutors and those close to the family described as a period of significant crisis. A family situation that had become untenable in ways that appear to have pushed her to a breaking point. Whatever the specific nature of that crisis, on the night in question, Kayong took her 3 youngest children and drowned them in the bathtub. A 7-year-old boy, a 2-year-old, an 11-month-old infant who had barely begun to exist in the world. When law enforcement arrived, the scene they found was one that those officers and investigators would carry with them for the rest of their lives. 3 children. 3 lives ended by the same hands that had held them, fed them, and in the case of the infant, brought them into the world less than a year before. The investigation and the legal proceedings that followed grappled with the question of Kayong's mental state at the time of the killings. This is not an unusual dynamic in cases involving mothers who kill their children. The relationship between maternal filicide and mental health is a well-documented area of research, and the criminal justice system is required to engage with it regardless of how uncomfortable that engagement may be. Prosecutors charged Yang with multiple counts of murder. She ultimately pleaded no contest to 3 counts of second-degree murder. The distinction between first-degree and second-degree murder in this context carries legal significance relating to the question of premeditation and the degree of deliberate intent involved. The no contest plea meant that Kayong did not contest the charges. She did not fight the case or offer an alternative account of events. She accepted the legal consequences. She was sentenced to 40 years to life in prison. Given her age at the time of sentencing and the length of the sentence, this is, in practical terms, likely to be a life sentence. She will almost certainly spend the rest of her natural life incarcerated. 3 boys. A bathtub. A night in Sacramento in March 2011 that ended a family and left a community searching for ways to understand what had happened and why. The Hmong American community in Sacramento, of which Kayong was a part, processed the tragedy with a particular kind of pain. The pain of a close-knit community confronting something that defied its values and its understanding of family and motherhood. Mental health resources, crisis intervention, support systems for mothers in extremis. These are the conversations that Kayong's case demands alongside the conversation about justice and accountability. Because 3 little boys are dead, and no sentence, no matter how long, gives them back 40 years to life. 3 boys who will never grow up. And a community that still carries the weight of a March night in 2011. Kayong will almost certainly never see freedom again. If this documentary has moved you, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to Cold Case Revisited. Your support is what keeps this channel alive and these stories in the public consciousness where they belong. What these 10 cases tell us. We have reached the end of 10 stories. 10 cases. 10 sentences. 10 women who will spend the rest of their lives, or the vast majority of them, behind the walls of California's correctional facilities. And we owe it to the children at the center of these stories to do more than simply catalog the crimes and the sentences. We owe them an honest reckoning with what these cases, taken together, tell us about the world we live in and the failures, personal, systemic, and societal, that allowed these tragedies to occur. The first thing these cases tell us is something about the myth of the safe home. In virtually every case in this documentary, the place where these children were most at risk was the place that should have been safest for them. Not a stranger's car. Not a dark alley. Not some distant, abstract threat. Home. The home that Gabriel Fernandez was placed into. The home that Anthony Avalos was brought back to after concerns were raised. The home where Susan Eubanks's 4 sons slept. The home that Sandi Nieves poured gasoline into. Home was the danger. And that truth demands that we rethink, in fundamental ways, the assumptions we make about where children are safest and who is keeping them safe. The second thing these cases tell us is about systemic failure at a scale that should be intolerable. Gabriel Fernandez, Anthony Avalos, Noah Quattro, 3 children in Los Angeles County. 3 cases in which Child Protective Services had been warned. 3 cases in which the warning did not translate into protection. 3 deaths that triggered investigations, resignations, legislative reforms, and public outcry. And yet the pattern persisted. Case after case. Warning after warning. The machinery of child protection, in California and across the country, continues to struggle with the fundamental challenge of identifying which children are in immediate danger and intervening before it is too late. This is not a simple problem with a simple solution, but it is a problem that these children paid for with their lives, and that demands continued, sustained, rigorous attention. The third thing these cases tell us is about the complexity of the category we call evil. These 10 women are not all the same. Gabriel Fernandez and Heather Barron and Sandi Nieves and Marilyn Kelle engaged in or enabled deliberate, sustained, premeditated violence against their children. Kelle acted, at least in part, in the context of a mental health crisis that the criminal justice system had to engage with even as it held her accountable. Kelle and Brassart's crime was rooted in negligence rather than deliberate cruelty. Susan Polk's harm to her children was real, but took a different form from the others. The word evil is useful as a shorthand, but it should not be used as a substitute for the harder, more demanding work of understanding what actually happened in each of these cases and why. The fourth thing these cases tell us is about resilience. The resilience of investigators who pursued these cases for years, in some instances for decades, and refused to let cold cases stay cold. Pamela Ferreyra thought the death of baby Barron was buried in a December night in 1994. She was wrong. Forensic science and the dedication of investigators who believe that every child deserves a name and an accounting reached across 20-plus years and found her. The technology will only get better. The databases will only grow larger. The reach of accountability will only extend further. And the fifth thing these cases tell us is the reason Cold Case Revisited exists. These children, Gabriel, Anthony, Brandon, Matthew, Nicholas, Benjamin, the daughters of Sandi Nieves, the children of Marilyn Kelle, the daughter of Kelle and Brassart, baby Barron, Noah Quattro, and the 3 sons of Kelle. These children are not statistics. They are not case numbers. They are not footnotes in a legal database. They were people. They had names. They had personalities and preferences and potential and futures that were stolen from them by the adults who were supposed to love them most fiercely and protect them most completely. Telling their stories is the least we can do. It is a form of bearing witness. It is a refusal to let what happened to them disappear into the noise of a world that moves very fast and has a very short memory. Every time someone watches this documentary, every time someone shares it or talks about it or argues about it, these children are remembered. They are present. They are not forgotten. That is why we do this. That is why Cold Case Revisited exists. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. Thank you for staying until the end. If you've made it to the end of this documentary, you already know that these stories are not easy to carry. They are not meant to be. The weight you feel after watching something like this is not a flaw in the experience. It is the appropriate response to the truth. It means you are paying attention. It means you understand what was lost. It means you are, in the most fundamental human way, refusing to look away from the hard things that the world puts in front of us. Cold Case Revisited will continue to bring you stories like these, stories from California, from across the country, and from around the world, wherever children have been failed and wherever justice has been pursued. We do this work because we believe that accountability matters. We believe that memory matters. We believe that the children who never got to tell their own stories deserve someone to tell them with care, with honesty, and with the respect that every human life commands. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Cold Case Revisited by clicking the subscribe button below. Hit the notification bell so that you are notified every time we upload new content. Like this video if it moved you, challenged you, or taught you something. And leave a comment below Tell us which case stayed with you the most. Tell us what you think needs to change. Tell us what you want us to cover next. The conversation doesn't end when the documentary does. It continues in the comments, in the shares, in the discussions you have with friends and family after watching. Keep that conversation going. Keep asking the hard questions. Keep demanding better from the systems that exist to protect the most vulnerable among us. This has been Cold Case Revisited. The children have not been forgotten. Like, comment, subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.